Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Ashley Early,
I'm so saying.
and today I am so excited. We are joined by Rob Napoli. Rob is an accomplished trainer, speaker, entrepreneur, business, and career coach. He is the founder of an executive coaching and training firm called Rise Up Coaching, as well as a board member and co-founder of the HapDay Group, which is a U.S. market entry company. Rob's passion is to help entrepreneurs, startups, and growth stage companies scale and grow. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely glad to be here, and thank you both for making this all happen. I'm excited.
This is going to be fun. So, I got to confess, I know you because we actually met last year because I helped
Yeah.
mentor a couple of cohorts from HapDay Group, which has been just absolutely phenomenal. It's been a lot of fun. But I want to kind of start out here for those who don't know you. Just tell everyone a little bit about kind of your sales journey because there's a
Mhm.
bunch in there that is both fascinating, unusual, and just really stupid cool.
I appreciate that. So I'll kind of start it back and how I kind of fell into sales. So when I went to college, I went to a small Division 3 college in a small town in Iowa and played Division 3 football. And I went and I wanted to be around sports. So I was like, I'll go work in athletic training. And so that's what I went picked as my major. Realized I wasn't good at it, didn't love it, didn't want to do it. Took an intro to marketing class. A professor had us watch Mad Men because this is just, it was just getting big, the whole thing. And so I fell in love with Dom Draper. And then
Because
things
you look
I think it's
so
how to
much
lose.
like him. Just a
Right. Well,
spitting
then
image.
then you had at the time, I think it was How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days with
Oh, God.
Kit Hudson and Matthew McConaughey. And Matthew McConaughey's corner office, right? With the pool table, like that. So I was like, oh, okay, that's what I want to do. Marketing was really advertising, which advertising and marketing are very different. So I went through this whole exploration of things, only to come out and be like, I don't really starting to find a job. I couldn't find a job in marketing, didn't know what the difference was between marketing, advertising, and sales. Taking a sales class, was told by the sales teacher I was really good at presenting in sales. So I found myself working in sales, and that was how I fell into it. I'd worked in sales in college for a shoe company, for a shoe store, and did pretty well. And I was like, cool, this is kind of fun. I get to talk to people. I like to talk. I get to make money. I like to make money, and I get to have cool stories and cool experiences. So I started in recruitment, and I used to sell recruit software developers into Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies in the Midwest, where when I started, I didn't know, I didn't know anything. I was just didn't really know the software development world. We'll figure this out. It took me about 18 months. And then the last 3.5 years there, I think I did, it was $5 million book of business. And so that was kind of my first big sales experience, top performer in the Midwest, one of the top performers in the top 10% of the company, the seventh largest IT staffing company in the nation. But something was missing, right? And I had, great income, car, bought a house, all these things. And I met my now wife in small town Iowa. She's my best friend from college's kid sister. So we know each other, reconnected after she came back from a summer abroad. And we started dating. Shortly after we started dating, she was like, I want to move to Europe after I graduate university. Don't want to do long distance. Would you want to move with me? Otherwise, this isn't gonna go anywhere. It's like,
You
sure,
chased a
let's
girl
do
to
it.
Europe and it
Yeah.
worked.
It did.
Not
I was
bad.
like, hell yeah, let's go. So I literally bought my house in July 2014. We kind of reconnected in August of 2014. In September of 2015, started a master's program in Milan, Italy. So I didn't have my house for a full year. I owned it for 2.5 years. I lived in it for a year. And that's pushing it. And so I went to grad school in Milan to get a master's in international multi-channel marketing. I was like, let's go back to this marketing thing. I love branding. I love content. And so let's big data. Let's go figure this out. So I went back to school, spent 2 years living abroad in Milan, got my master's degree. I coached professional American football for a team called the Milano Seamen. Got to travel all of Europe coaching American football, which was awesome, right? And when I got done, because of football, I got connected to this really cool startup that was doing a wearable device connected to an app. They were selling online through e-commerce. And I was brought in to really build the content strategy and help them scale and grow. Also doing sales as well, kind of building out, more of an e-commerce, but also other avenues of making money and revenue for the company. Help them scale. I think in 6 months, we went from like 5K MRR to 100K MRR. We got accepted to come to New York City to go through an accelerator program. So I got to do a 4-month accelerator program in New York City, raised some money, did some really cool things. Unfortunately, US expansion just wasn't really in the cards and wasn't really quite working as a market entry. And that whole kind of process of coming into the US market, even though it was our biggest market from an online sales perspective, like building an office and trying to build that physical presence here was just not the way to go. So we ended that contract, and I went to one of the largest global corporate recruiting firms and spent the next 18 months building out a new kind of like line of sales and recruitment on the marketing team, and figured I wanted to go corporate. I was kind of hired as a culture changer with my hair and my beard. That the hair I said was non-negotiable to cutting, even though they asked. I never wore a tie, even though they kept telling me to. But that was a really cool experience to get that large global corporate experience, and kind of got to that point where I was doing well and building out a team and these things, and just realized that wasn't for me. And so I left and went to a smaller firm where I was doing some good stuff, selling, whatever, but there wasn't passion there, right? And my boss at the time sat me down and he fired me. When he fired me, he gave me a severance and said, Rob, you need to go build your own thing. You need to go do this thing that you're passionate about, which isn't this. And you need to go just like do it. That's why I started HapDay Group and Rise Up Coaching at the same time. Did more of HapDay Group on the front end of it. Really built kind of this sales as a service company. We've got a team that helps grow sales in the local market here in the US for companies coming from outside. We do soft landing and training programs on how to sell, how to scale, and how to go to market. And then Rise Up Coaching is my more executive coaching, one-to-one speaking. And I also do some corporate training with that on leadership management. So the stuff I train on now is around sales, marketing, go-to-market, personal brand, and leadership training, how to be a manager, especially for first-time managers. How do you kind of take that step up? That's kind of my journey, a little bit long-winded, but multiple steps. The whole point of it, though, is it's not linear. It never has been, and I don't want it to be, right?
Totally. And you've got the interesting angle here where, I'm sorry, I just love that you chased a girl to Europe and it worked, because you always hear that story and it doesn't, Very so true. There's like, it's
not without its challenges, but
no, for sure. As somebody else who started dating someone and then a few months later found out they were going to Europe, I just talked my way onto the study abroad that he was on. I didn't actually move my life, but it's rare how often that works. So it's like, oh, that's another reason why we get along. But it's interesting. You had this international experience. You came back and you keep getting pulled into this international community. What is it about trying to figure out international business when so many SDRs and people and companies are scared of it that keeps pulling you in?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what I really love about it is that, and we saw this in 2020, right? With pandemic, you can sell from anywhere, right? And sales is a universal language, really. When you think about the sales process, right? It's universal. It's whether you're in the US or Sweden or, Southeast Asia and China, the difference is maybe how many touch points you go after somebody. In the US, it takes 12 to 16 to have a meaningful conversation. You do that in Europe, they're going to look at you like you're crazy and tell you to stop. And maybe even yell at you on the street, right? They don't want that many touch points. So those things are different, but the international community is just so much opportunity for growth. And we're lucky. We're one of the 1-2% that live in America that have the biggest economic market. It's to be argued depending China and India, especially with their ecosystems growing and whatnot, but the largest free trade economy in the world. Not everybody gets that. And there's amazing innovation everywhere. And from having lived and studied abroad and working with so many cool companies and having experience even the negatives of being and working for an Italian-based organization and coming to the US, where I was told, hey, Rob, we love what you guys are doing. We want to invest in Italian-based companies because they're very risk averse and the government is not as strong. Like, sorry, it's just like we can't do that unless you like transfer everything here. It's like there's got to be a way, right? And so I started exploring this with folks about why are we so afraid to work cross border. And I had a really cool business partner who believed in that as well. And so that's kind of how HapDay Group really expanded, right? We both had this love for cross-border business and acceleration. We wanted to figure out how to make that happen, how to start the conversation, and how to tie those loops together, because so many people try to come here and make things happen, and there's common pitfalls. And so it was weird. It kind of randomly just kept getting pulled back into this ecosystem and growing and building my sphere of influence through process of learning and making mistakes and working with folks and asking folks tough questions on why.
So what do you think is the biggest why?
A lot of it has to do with just scalability and resiliency, right? When you're a US-based company and US-based law, there's things that if you're going to buy into a startup or buy into a growth stage company and use them, if they go defunct or under, that you still have some sort of reciprocity. When it comes to cross-border, they can't, and so that's scary. Country of origin effect comes into play here big. And the other big thing is service, right? The US is based on customer service. Not everyone else in the world looks at customer service the way we do. And so a lot of times it's like, am I going to be served the way that I want to? And then hours of operation. And this is what I tell every international company looking to be here. You need to have somebody working US hours all the time, because you can't have an issue come up at 5 o'clock on a Friday in New York City. And you're like, oh, it's the weekend for me, I'll deal with it on Monday, when it's mission critical for them. So if you don't have somebody working those hours, even though it's 11 o'clock on a Friday night, you're not going to last long. You need to be there to serve your clients. And so that's why so many US businesses are hesitant to buy, especially to startups or growth stage companies from outside the US. And then also just, is it going to work, right? It might work in Europe, but Europe has very different laws, rules, and regulations. And so there's that whole thing. What are your actual case studies in the US, right? So that's a couple of whys, but it comes down to really trust in the product and trust in what could happen if things go wrong.
Well, and I think it's not just the trust, it's fear of unknown. And especially now as I begin my international journey and stuff like that, we have much more in common than we have different. Like, I'll give you an example. Employment contracts. US, everything is at will. There's no such thing as a guarantee. We're all just used to it. You suck at your job, you're going to get fired. Europe is much slower on hiring, because if you suck at your job, it's the company's job to train you. And they have to prove that they have trained you properly, and you are still incapable of doing the job before they can fire you. So it's this,
and then even if they do fire you, they have to pay you out. So
to a certain extent. But it's really interesting, because like in the US we hear that and we're like, oh God, that's insane. It's crazy. It's this, it's that. But the net result is there really aren't mass layoffs like there are in the US. There's a lot more stability. There's a lot more healthy relationships and dialogues around performance, where in the US things are hidden and hyped, and people are hired and fired with the whims of every new VP of sales that comes in every 18 months. So it's this, but I think it's this weird thing, I think, where especially the American market, which we hold up as this, is on this pedestal of being the best market in the world. People stick to what they know. And it's like, okay, I'll take the devil I know in the US market over this seeming uncertainty abroad being outside the US. And it's funny because I'm seeing the same thing with European companies being scared of doing things in the US for a lot of the same reasons. But in their case, like, well, I'm scared to hire someone in the US because they could quit in 5 minutes. It's like, it's this weird, like, for me, it feels very Dark Mirror. It's like everything's the same, but slightly different. But it's the same fear. It's just a different reason for it. It's the opposite reason.
It is. And when it comes to building teams and talent, that's also kind of a weird thing, because they also, because you have this like hard process of the hire and fire, that you still have to go step 1, step 2, step 3 up the ladder, right? And so you don't have that that opportunity to grow. And just because you have years of experience doesn't mean you actually have experience. I know, I took a job where I had a 23-year-old who had started their career in New York, was like teaching me things, and I'd been doing the job for 6 years, but because I did it in a slower market, the amount of stuff that they encountered in a year was stuff that it took me 3 years to learn. And I was just like, sometimes speed of market and the volume is more than years of experience, right? So that's the other kind of thing when you look at the differences between US and others, because depending on what market you're in, depending on where, also depends on how fast and how much you handle and what you learn to overcome quickly, both from a talent level and a company level.
Dog years. I always tell people it's dog years. When you're doing anything that's a high growth market, 1 year's worth 7. It's dog years.
Absolutely.
Sue, I'm curious. I've actually got a question for you because our viewers heard in your minisode, obviously you're based in Hyderabad.
Yep. I'm based in India.
And you work those crazy hours selling to the US from abroad. I'm curious, kind of with you, like hearing Rob and I talk about kind of this US-centric mindset. What are we missing? What are we being selfish, self-centered Americans about in this conversation?
Yeah, I think this is, something I've been wanting to, it's been a personal struggle, honestly. People assume a lot of things about you. Trust is something, unfortunately, we have to earn and prove multiple times over, right? Irrespective, just because I'm based in a different country, period, right? Whether it's the fact that either if I want to move from India to US or I want to stay here and work, it's assumed that I will take advantage of the company, take the visa and leave the company, right? It's assumed. Yeah, that's what you do. Just because I'm a brown person from another country trying to come there, right? I know, and it's assumed that we will not give the kind of customer experience a person in the US has. It's assumed that somebody in the US will not be able to understand me, right? It's assumed that I will not put in the hours that a person in the US does, right? Or work the same hours. Yeah, I think what you touched upon, the trust factor, for me, that's been the bigger challenge, like getting people to trust, right? Getting people, irrespective of the fact that they know you already.
Yeah.
And you need to win the trust from the same person over and over again. That's something I found. It's not that you win the trust and the person trusts you. No. Yeah. No way. No. You win. You have to win the trust from that person every single day.
Yeah. Well, there's an interesting thing that you mentioned, right? It's the country of origin effect, right? Being from India and looking at a lot of jobs went and outsourced to India for lower rate and call centers and that whole stigma of what it is or what it was, right? And so you're fighting also that country of origin effect. And you brought up the visa thing, which I still can't believe employers do this. I mean, we sponsor that when I worked at Kforce, we sponsored visas. It takes 5 years to even get to that point. It cost, at the time was the first step was like $1,500, and it was like 3, 5, 7 for each step of the process. And even if you work for a company for 5 years and give them 5 years and you leave after the 7-year process of getting your green card, that's still 7 years of investment. Like that's also on the company to like create a working environment that people want to stay in. And like that always like weirded me out too, because it's a two-way street. And this is why it's a whole other conversation, but why I love talking about hiring and this whole process of, from the company perspective and from the candidate perspective, being a recruiter, having hired and been hired into, that's just something that we need to look at and reevaluate is like the average life of employee, the value you get out of whether it's 6 months, 18 months, 3 years, 7 years, what that looks like, and what the cost benefit is to sponsor somebody and have that talent in the ecosystem, even if it's not with your company in the ecosystem, is actually beneficial because the US market thrives on success. So it's almost like we should be applauding that and having these conversations of opening that opportunity up, but we don't. We look at it as a negative, coming back to there's no trust or fear of the unknown, right? And to that place. And so you touched on a lot of key things that make it really tough in this global ecosystem that you're just going to have to do. And it's, kind of the reverse, right? Americans have to prove that we're not boisterous, arrogant assholes all the time, even though that's what we appear to be, right? We got to
The
prove
emphasis
that
on
we
all
are
the
not.
time there. I think most of us have our moments.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that Americans are always like talking themselves up and have big egos, right? And so that's, something to look at in the reverse. I mean, people are always like, Rob, how are you like energetic all the time? Like that's a front, right? Like it's your shtick, right? It's like, no. If you ever met me, if you ever hung out with me and just a call, this is who I am, right? Like this is me, authentically and truly me. You can, you know what I mean? You have to earn that trust day in and day out of like, Americans are bullshitters. Are they bullshitting me? Or are you telling me the truth? And so being authentic and being real. So trust works both ways in the fear of the stigmas that we need to drop, right? Because not everybody is. And just because you're from India doesn't mean that you're going to be like this. And we need to really look at that.
If I'm trusting you, like my point is, if I'm trusting you to pack my bags, pick up my whole life, and I'm trusting you with that, my whole life is not more than your job. Right? If I'm trusting you with that, you better trust me with that job. That is my opinion. Americans,
are this the stigma of the culture is that our work is our life, right? Like, the hot thing with millennials was work-life balance, and yes, it needs to be, but then, the older generation is like, oh, back in my day, yes, back in your day, things have been different, right? And we work a lot, and we have no problem working a lot when we're passionate and we love it. And so if, you're expecting me to do these things with my life to be a part of this company, then trust me to do the job that you're bringing me in for, and give me that same respect and trust that I'm going to be that employee that you are bringing me in for. And that I think expands not even just like cross-culturally, just hiring in general, right? When you bring somebody in, you gotta bring them in with trust that you're going to make the most and they're going to make the most of this opportunity. It's not always going to be right, but if you start hiring out of fear, and then the minute they step in the door thinking, when are they going to leave? And like, let's put this on the back foot. Like it's no good for anybody. That's where toxic work cultures come in.
Yeah.
So I want to break down a couple. I want to do kind of a fun thing here. I think we should call out some stereotypes by region and break down why they're bullshit. So Sue, what is your most despised stereotype about Americans?
That all of them expect us to be full of energy all the time. Like I don't have attitude because I'm quiet, or I'm not foolish because I don't shout and talk all the time. I'm just quiet.
God, that's true. We get all freaked out. We're like, why are you being quiet? Talk more. Yeah. No. So I'm thinking now back to like school and stuff when like, Rob, I don't know if you had this, but like teachers who would like pick on the quiet kid and like force them up to do really uncomfortable things and stuff like that. I always felt really bad for the real introverts in my classes, usually to the point where I was like over talking them, which they appreciated, but the teacher hated. But
and I think, it's also a lot about our culture, right? Our culture says, listen more, period. From day one, we've been taught, listen more, right? And again, listening is like one of the values you inculcate in our culture. So we listen, and that becomes a part of who we are, and we're listening. And listening is not a bad thing. Like, hey, I listen, I absorb. Doesn't mean I'm not excited or I'm not interested in what's happening. But yeah, just don't ask me to talk all the time.
Well, I'd say that's even like arguably, if we have to choose directness or listening as a skill for salespeople, listening all day, every day. If you come in with the ability to listen, I can train the rest. But if training listening can be as an American who was trained to speak her mind, can be tough. That I need to get smacked down a few times to learn the importance of listening.
Me as well. I mean, that was always kind of my thing, is that I can listen when I need to, and I'm good at it. I'm a good listener, but I also like to, I'm a talker and I want to share, right? And so I think, it's really important that we understand some of those things, those differences, and culturally too, right? Like, this is one of the big things that you notice culturally, cross-culturally. It's like those little nuances, and that's what makes, entering new markets also really tough, right? Is those nuances of things like that. And that, you know, US market is extremely, extremely competitive, and to be heard, you have to be above the noise. I mean, think about this: on a daily basis in the US, we get hit with over 10,000 messages a day, right? That is a lot. And so in order for you to be heard, you have to be louder and louder and louder, which then cadences up this whole stereotype of talking. But to your point, I love the listening piece, because we have two ears and one mouth for a reason. And you can train salespeople to be direct. You can train them to say the right things, but if you can't train them to shut up and listen, they're never going to be successful salespeople. And I remember when I went to training, my first real corporate training, I got picked on the first day because I had the hair kind of flipped down, earrings in down in Tampa. And I knew when the VP of sales who was doing the training session walked in that I was going to get picked on. And I had never done this account side thing. I actually just switched roles, went down to do a new role. So everyone, usually when you go down for training, you have 6 months of experience before you go down. I didn't. I was down like on day one, and I answered their question right, but then I just kept rambling. He was like, "Shut up. You answered the question in the first 20 seconds. Shut up. You actually lost me because you couldn't stop talking." And I was like, that was like a huge moment that I never forget in my development in sales. And I still struggle with it a lot. Stay on topic in one time.
All right. So Rob, what's a stereotype about Europe and doing business with Europe or doing business with Italy?
Okay. I like that you qualified Italy, because Europe is so general and there's so many nuances, right?
Which is a stereotype in and of itself, that Europe is a country and Americans tend to treat Europe as a country, and it ain't.
It's not. No.
God, no.
Like, it's funny because when you're actually selling, I'll go to the Italy thing, but like, if you're selling to somebody in Finland, they want like data, short, simple, don't oversell it. Just like, it's got to be rooted in data. Here it is. Germans want very precise, like this, then this, then this, right? Italians look more like Americans. They like the art of the story. And so they want that kind of big bang ending. So you have to give the art of the story. And it's kind of true. The hard thing about Italians is they'll just talk circles and say yes, and that they don't know how to say no. And that's always tough, as you're talking, yes, and you're talking these stories, and it's like they're afraid when to say no. And I think that cross-culturally happens a lot. People are a lot afraid to say no, but I think from Italian culture, they don't really like to say no very well, which is kind of tough. It's something that you have to deal with. But at the same point, not every Italian, when they say yes, is lying to you. And so you're like, oh, they're just saying yes because they're Italian. It's no. It's really that they might actually understand. And you have to when you wait over the comments, you have to ask better clarifying questions, right? Like, the other side of things, to your point in listening, is you can be a great listener and you can be a great salesperson if you ask great questions. And if you don't get the answer you want, or you don't know, ask another question. And that's how you find out if somebody's telling you the truth or not, because times not all of them are saying yes when they mean no, and not all of them are afraid to tell you no and won't. Like, there's plenty that do, and that's like the main stereotype. And it's like, oh, it's time they say yes, that they don't actually know what they're doing. How do you know? If you didn't ask the question, if you didn't clarify, how the hell do you really know?
All right, Rob, this has been super fun. And now we're going to switch gears slightly, and we're going to do the lightning round. So these are a series of rapid fire questions designed just to be fun. Go through these quickly. So don't think too much, don't stress too much. But to start off, what's your morning routine?
I can't live without my coffee. I literally get up, put the coffee on first, bathroom, coffee, and then I read an article. I'm either reading Morning Brew or I pull up ESPN and check out what happened the night before in sports. But first thing is always straight to the coffee pot, turn that thing on. I need coffee.
All right. Pick one person who's had a significant impact on your career.
Ooh, there's a lot of people. I'm gonna say probably the person who gave me the biggest chance and really trained me would have been Carrie LaCava, so who hired me at K-Force back in Iowa. I worked for her for 5 years, and she was an amazing boss. She always took time to take that extra level and train, but she always gave me the freedom and space to make my own decisions and make my own mistakes and have my own successes. And it was because of her that I think going to Italy and some of the things I did and chose to do later in life worked out, was because I had a great foundation and got a great boss. And part of the reason I took that job, because I had a job before and recruiting sucked, was because of her. And I would say, like, take a job because of opportunity and a boss. So Carrie LaCava would be something that sticks out to me right at the gate of having a huge impact in my career, in my life, really, in business.
I love it. What's your pump up song?
I have a couple of them, but like my ultimate go-to when I want to vibe out is Return of the Mac. Like every time I play that, it's like, yep, like that's it. It's a vibe. So I'd say that one.
Wow. Okay. What's the one thing you wish you learned earlier?
Everything.
I think that's the most honest answer we've ever had.
Everything. I mean, I'm a continuous learner. I love learning. I'm a know-it-all because I hate not knowing something, because we have a phone in our pocket. We should never not know something. So if I don't know it, I'm going to go figure it out. I'm going to figure out why I don't know it. But one thing I think would love to have learned early on in my career is being a go-giver. I've always been a great networker. I've always been a great connector. I've always been really easy to get along with. Like, I've always been kind of called a chameleon. I can just get along with everybody. I grew up in a city, but I also grew up on a farm. Like, I've lived all these places. I've always had this ease of connecting with people. But I always kind of, early in my career and early in my life, thought about how it benefited me. And when I made that switch to really how it benefits others and being a go-giver, a true go-giver, ever since I've lived my life like that, like, good things have happened. And granted, that's why I'm lucky to be doing some of the things I'm doing now, but I really wish I had adapted that earlier in my life.
I think I know the answer to this question now. What's your favorite sales book?
That is one of them. But actually, one of my favorite sales books and how I learned to sell was I read Spin Selling. And I loved it because it's still valid today. And it's like the baseline for a lot of things. And my takeaway wasn't to spin it in a negative way. What I always loved and what I learned from that was that, and people tell me this, you're wrong all the time, people want to be sold to. They don't want to be sold at. They want to be sold to in the fact that we buy on emotion. We buy with our limbic brain, right? So we buy with emotion. People want to feel emotion and buying process. And so when you think about spin selling, you think about this tactic of kind of spinning it back on them and kind of making them sell you, or walking them down the path, however you want to look and interpret the book. What you're doing is you're putting that emotional attachment that, hey, we're co-creating this together. And it's something that the book was written forever ago, and it's still valid today. And in fact, a lot of the Challenger sale, the sailor, with all these new methods were kind of built off of that. And so I really love that. I mean, Go Giver, Sell More is definitely up there, but to really answer that question, the book that kind of put everything into perspective of my style of selling, to start with Spin Selling. And then when I read Go Giver, Sell More, and I put those two methodologies together, everything changed.
Right. What's one way someone could have been a better ally to you?
It's a very vague question. And, I've been pretty fortunate that I've always had people in my corner, especially growing up a twin. So I have a twin brother who is my ride or die. We're a minute apart. It's part of the reason that I love attention and fight for it all the time, is I grew up my whole life having to fight for attention. So I've always never felt truly alone. So I've kind of been lucky in that regard. I've had a lot of times where I felt not supported in a lot of things I do, because I am very ambitious and I'm always thinking about bigger things. And so a lot of times I have a lot of people like, you can never do that. You can't do that. Like, that's not for you. Nice. Or the other one is just being compared. So I always have a guy in my corner and my twin brother, but I was always being compared. And it's like, well, that's not how your brother would have done it. Or, and that would always hurt, right? Because I'm my own person. Just because I'm a twin, I'm my own person.
I'm now terrified of the idea of a twin Napoli out there. That's both terrifying and oddly comforting at the same time. I don't know how to feel about that. All right.
Yeah.
Does he play football as well?
He was a wrestler, but he played football in high school. He actually coaches. He's a strength and conditioning coach for a Division I football squad. So he's built like me. My mom had the two of us, and then had two other brothers who were both like 6'1" and 6'2".
Wow.
So if you can imagine the food bill at our place.
I was just imagining the destruction of your furniture.
Oh, nothing. My mom couldn't keep anything nice. I feel bad for her. Like looking back now and like being an adult or kind of a semi-adult and trying to have nice things, I'm like, shit, my mom, wow. Like she dealt with a lot. And, so did my dad, but my parents were divorced. So my mom had the four of us and we were much more rowdy around her than we were my dad, I think.
What's one way you're working to be a better ally for others?
Something that's really struck me about the term being an ally, right? Because when done wrong, it makes it more about me than somebody else. And so I've always tried to live through action. And for me, it's about, the way I've tried to be, and I've always been, I think, and have learned from a lot of things about what allyship means and supporting others, is that if I have an opportunity to be able to step up and do something, I need to, and I need to take action. And action can be in many different ways, right? And so the simple way of just reaching out to friends and making sure people are okay, making sure that you are involving yourself in the conversation, or even better, being in conversations and not letting something slip by when somebody else says something and just be like, oh, well, let it just kind of go under the rug. Like you need to have those tough conversations. And so I think, how I've been trying to be a better ally is getting out of my own way and not being afraid to continue those actions into a more vocal arena and making sure that I'm being more aware, because there's many times where I'm just ignorant. And I think that I, have to continue to learn and be in those conversations and think. And it's really easy to use a white male, especially somebody my size who doesn't get picked on. Like, I don't think about things that many others do and have to deal with. And we all have our own struggles, but you just have to think and listen and be aware of the conversation and have an open mind and open heart and not let things just pass and slide over because it's tough and I don't want to deal with. It's a deep question, when you think of, especially in the current climate we have today, what does being an ally mean? It means so much to so many. And it's easy to say I'm an ally. Oh, look at me, I'm an ally. But are you doing it? Have you done anything? What does that actually mean? Because it's easy to be like, cool, look at me, I'm an ally. What am I actually doing? I'm making it about me and not about what I'm being an ally for, whatever that cause is.
Performative versus impactful.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's a great way to look at it. I couldn't put it into words so eloquently. So thank you.
It only came up because I literally was bemoaning performative stuff like that, like 10 minutes before this call. I spent 10 minutes trying to remember the word performative. So,
well, what is your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
Usually it's a combination of three things: a glass of bourbon or rye, country music, and chocolate. And it's usually, if I have a bad day and that's kind of the thing, I'll probably grab my wife around because she loves chocolate as well. She won't drink the bourbon. She'll definitely eat all the chocolate. And if we've got country music on, sometimes we'll just have a random dance party when we're both having a bad day, because sometimes you just need to have a little bit of whiskey, a little bit of good music, and a little bit of chocolate. It cures almost everything.
What's the last whiskey you tried that you discovered that you love?
That's a great question. The last one that I discovered that I loved is I like it. I like it a lot, but I don't know if I like the bourbon or the rye better. But it's Van Brunt's. It's a local New York whiskey. I have an American, a rye, and a bourbon. I got a small bottle. It was really a fan. I was given a few recommendations on some whiskeys that I've got to try. So I have a whole list of things that I can't wait to try. But one of my favorite whiskeys, I'm a big rye. So if I'm ranking, it's rye, bourbon, scotch. I'm still learning to drink scotch. Not the biggest fan.
As
Nothing beats a
someone
good
who
bourbon,
is,
but rye is just so good.
as someone else who's really into rye, like I will drink rye over bourbon any day of the week and twice on Sundays. The best drink I ever had was a Michter's Rye Old Fashioned that I got at a bar in London that I will spend the rest of my life trying to recreate. That thing was just
Not
perfection in a glass, and it was so unexpected. But
the whole concept of an old fashioned is perfection in a glass.
I know,
If you get a bad, if I ever get an old fashioned and it doesn't, even if it's bad, the bartender should be done. Like if you can't make a good old fashioned, like that is like a staple. Now I want to have a whiskey. I'm going to have a whiskey right after this. Like,
oh, I'm
this is
going.
already done.
I was gonna say. So if you're learning to drink scotch, because I'm also on my scotch journey, Irish whiskey has been my gateway drug. Getting into the Irish whiskeys, and now all of a sudden I'm drinking scotches, and I'm actually, because my husband's a huge scotch drinker, so I'm drinking the Irish. Now I'm noticing I'm tasting his scotches, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah.
So Irish was my gateway to Scotland, which is
I think that's
bad multicultural in the premise of this episode, but
you know what though, it is what it is, and sometimes you have to experience in different ways. And you're not the first person to say Irish to Scotch is the way to go. Very wise seller that we both know has shared that tip with me, and his love for the Irish. So I'm working on that. But my problem is that I just love rye so much that if I find Templeton rye, which is my favorite, it's game over. I look at all these bottles and it's like that's smooth and that's perfection. And I love drinking whiskey neat or on the rocks. Like just a neat glass of whiskey or right on the rocks. It's just so refreshing. So it's hard for me to go a step further to trying new things and figuring out how best to drink them.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us. This has been an absolute blast. Where can people find you, learn more about what you're doing? Keep in touch.
Absolutely. I will make sure to send you my link tree with all the different things, but Instagram or LinkedIn. LinkedIn's my biggest. I mean, LinkedIn's where you find everything. So it's just linkedin.com/in/Rob Knapp. Easy to find. It's Rob Napoli on LinkedIn, or Rise Up Rob Knapp on Instagram. Best two places to find and see what's going on.
Brilliant. All right, Rob, this has been so much fun. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. Don't forget to subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and follow us on our newly revamped and active social media accounts on Instagram, on Twitter, and on LinkedIn. All the links in the bio, as well as more about Rob. And we will see you guys next week for another episode of The Other Side of Sales.